Hey JPTNation and everyone else in between. I am Journals, HT Journals, and coming straight from a page from my journal, we're going to be talking about reverse culture shock. Just to recap, so far, many of you know by now that I lived overseas in Korea for 3 years. You know my favorite tips that helped me ease the tension with culture shock while I lived overseas, and you now know that I'm back here in America. But what many of you guys don't know is that when you come back from being overseas for so long, you deal with reverse culture shock. And reverse culture shock is not something that we think about really when we travel. And that's because our main concern is thinking about the challenges we'll have when we go to this new country because it's unfamiliar territory. Never of what it'll be like coming back home for us because it's familiar to us. So we don't think we need to prepare for anything. But I'd like to argue that in the way that we prepare to live overseas and everything that comes with that, we need to prepare for coming back home. Because there are a lot of feelings and emotions and things that we're going to encounter that we're not going to be able to exactly pinpoint or communicate with others unless we first understand why we're feeling the way that we are. So, what is reverse culture shock? Well, just like how culture shock is the experience you have when you leave a place that's familiar to you and you travel to a place that isn't familiar to you, reverse culture shock is when you leave that place that was unfamiliar to you and you come back to the place that is familiar to you. And this video is important because when you come back, more than likely, the people in your circle that you come back to, unless they've traveled and come back, and so they be able to identify with you, those people, they won't understand the feelings and the things you'll be struggling with returning home. And neither will you unless you're prepared. So it's best to identify some of those feelings so that when you're feeling them, you know where they're coming from and you can self-soothe and make the transition easy. So number one on my list of signs that you're dealing with reverse culture shock is you don't fit in. And of course, this isn't everyone's situation, but for the most of us, this really will apply. Perhaps, you go home and your room has been turned into the storage room, or your room has been given to somebody else. You don't have a room anymore. So you're stuck having to make the basement, the den, the attic, the couch, your new bedroom. And it's a tough pill to swallow because it's a subtle reminder that the space that you used to occupy has either been A, erased, or two, just filled with something else. And unless you're prepared for that, it might sting a little. And this idea of space no longer being yours, it extends far outside just physical space you no longer occupy when you come home, but in other areas as well. And this transitions into my second point. Number two on my list of things that you deal with when it comes to reverse culture shock is the idea that people have moved on. So that friend you used to meet up with every Friday to talk about your week, your relationship, your parents, whatever, those group of friends you used to meet up every Sunday with to go to the movie theater, well, they're busy now. And you might have expected to pick right up from where you left off, But that doesn't happen. That's not the case because they're in a relationship now, or they're married, they have kids to tend to, and they filled that space with something else, and now you're trying to find a way to see where you fit in again. And you didn't think that you'd have to find your way back into a routine with them because you thought that that space would always be reserved for you. And that wasn't the case. And it hurts a little bit if you're not prepared for that. And I think it's important to remember that it's not that they don't want to be with you anymore or they don't want to hang out with you. It's just that they found something to do. Just like how you found something else to do other than being there when you left the country. So you might want to be prepared for that if you think your friends are just always going to be there waiting for you, because they're not. Number 3 is no one cares. No one cares. It's perfect number 3. So you done been away for like 8 years. You've had monkey big toe in Thailand. You've seen the best beach in the Philippines. You've had the most amazing ramen in Japan. But you come back and you expect to be bombarded with all these questions and you're excited to share, but no one really asks you anything. And you don't know how to feel about that. Because when you left, all of these people were so curious about you. They wanted to know about where you come from, what you ate over there, what the houses look like, what the weather was like. But then when you come back, no one's really asking you those same questions. So the type of like importance that you felt when you were overseas and the questions you were asked there don't really match up with how you're greeted when you come home when it comes to these experiences. And you think that the level of excitement that you have in wanting to share what you've seen and done would be matched up with their level of excitement of wanting to hear what you've seen and done, but it's not. And who knows why it isn't? But you really shouldn't be worried about why it isn't, because I mean, you didn't travel to tell these experiences. You traveled so that you can experience these experiences. So if I were you, because you don't want to just be talking about things you've seen, and oh, in Thailand things are like this, or oh, in Cambodia there was this, or this is better in Japan. Like, you don't want to do that, because then you're going to come across like a bragger, and that's not what you want. You want to reserve those stories for like 4 groups of people. For me, this works. So my 4 groups are other travelers. You might find out other people around you, now that you're back home, have traveled to certain places. So you're going to be able to have the certain kinds of conversations you expected to have now that you're back home. The other types of people are the people who ask. If they don't ask you, they don't want to know. So if they ask you, then it's okay to share because they want to know. They're curious. And the third group of people is your children. To them, you're the Superman, you're the Superwoman. To them, you're famous for doing all these things. And 4th group is your grandkids. So for me, if they don't fall into any of these categories, and I don't got no kids, I don't got no grandkids, so if they don't fall really into these 2 categories, I really don't say much about anything. Okay, JPT Nation, that's all I have for you for this week. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope that these signs were relatable or something that you feel that you can use in the future. Be sure to stay tuned next week. I'll have part 2 where I'll be giving you another 3, maybe 4 signs that you're dealing with reverse culture shock. See you next time.